Okay, hi. We are just going to kind of dive straight into it. I've not had the best of days today. I've had episodes, my sleep has been out of whack, and all of my plans for how today was going to exist are not how it has existed. Um, and I've had to shuffle so much around to get anything done. But I wanted to do some streaming. I wanted to do this today. I definitely wanted a chance to go through this as quickly as possible. Not rush it, but as quickly as possible because the town hall meeting that I'm attending is on Thursday, and I wanted to at least get through this over the weekend so that I had time to actually prepare what I was going to do, what I was going to say, actually have some informed opinions come the town hall meeting. And at this point, I'm not going to get through the whole document, but if I can at least get through this part today, I'll be much happier. So, recommendations and actions. Let's get started. Oh, and I can see a couple of people already watching. Hi, that's great. Um, if you talk to me on Twitch, I can see your responses. If you talk to me on Facebook, I will see your comments. So, please, if you have anything to say, if you want to think, like, if shit, hang on. If sorry, I was just trying to set something up and I just double took my own audio. Um, but the point is that if you have any input, if you have any thoughts, if you disagree with me, if you agree with me, if you think of something that I haven't thought of, please leave a comment. Please actually say something, um, because I'd rather cover as many bases as possible. Um, yes. Anyway, moving forwards, recommendations and actions. So this section is not so much the meat, but definitely the bones of the document. This is the overview. As you can see, sort of over here, it's just like all of these different points that will get explained in more detail um, elsewhere. And like this is just a lot of discussion about it. I'm looking forward to reading this section myself, very much so. But all of this is important. All of this is fleshing it out, and this is just the kind of the dot points, but with smaller dot points. So let's start. Recommendation 1: invest in foundational supports to bring fairness, balance, and sustainability to the ecosystem supporting people with disability. Now, I'm going to click on this and see if it actually explains things like what the foundational supports are in this section, but that was more explained in the glossary and also in shortened speech, which I also did a video on with my own thoughts about it. The foundational supports are largely about things that are outside what was normally considered the scope of NDIS, because they are finally recognizing officially, not that it wasn't recognized unofficially, but they are recognizing officially that there are a lot of areas outside of the traditional scope of NDIS that are actually very important for addressing the barriers of disability. Um, so Action 1.1: National Cabinet should agree to jointly design, fund, and commission an expanded and coherent set of foundational disability supports outside of individualized NDIS budgets. Um, this is huge, and yes, it could make NDIS much more expensive, but money spent here, um, depending on how the economics of it is set up, but money spent here will go much, much further than money spent otherwise. For like this is the sort of thing of just like, hey, we need ramps or we need elevators put into this place, in order for it to be accessible. This is the fund for it. Um, so this could be one of the most beneficial things, because it maximizes the curb cut effect. If you're not familiar with the curb cut effect, are you like most people are probably familiar. If you go to any street corner in Australia, especially if you go to any street corner, it's got that sort of dip so that it meets the road, and you've kind of got that inbuilt ramp. Those were originally built. Those are disability aids. That's what those are. When those were first being rolled out, in particular over in America, but when they were first being rolled out, a lot of them were done by activists, not by government. But it benefits so many people. It benefits women with prams. It benefits removalists. It benefits the male. It benefits absolutely everyone. And the curb cut effect has since become a term which refers to the fact that when you support the people at the lowest ends of a given spectrum or whatever, um, it often means that everybody else is going to benefit up from there. So that's the curb cut effect, and it has been proven time and time again, especially within the educational sphere. Um, Oftentimes, the way that like autistic people learn is actually a better way of learning for everybody in the classroom. Not always, but often it is, and it creates a more thorough engagement with the students and a much more thorough learning. This is not always going to be true, and a lot of it actually comes down to the culture of the given classroom and the limitations of the studies, but we do often see that sort of thing. So this is basically National Cabinet should fund curb cut effect. That is one way of looking at it. Obviously, that's not the stated goal, but the tangential benefits are potentially quite huge. So money spent here is some of the best money that you could spend on something like disability supports. Anyway, the Department of Social Services, with state and territory governments, should develop and implement a foundational support strategy. So that's just, they should have a strategy for that, which completely agree with. National Cabinet should agree to jointly invest in and redesign information and advice and capacity building supports. Yep. National Cabinet should agree to jointly invest in navigation support for people with disability outside the NDIS. Absolutely. Hopefully this is all making as much sense for you as I read it as it is for me, but basically everything that I said earlier about, hey, curb cut effect, supporting everybody, both disabled and non-disabled alike, via these things that are supposed to support disabled people, like doing this little thing to support this one disabled person, if you do it right, actually helps all similarly disabled people and going up from there. And this is, so far, this is all about, hey, we should have this thing, we should have a group that actually studies it, that promotes the strategy, that organizes this, so on and so forth. No, those are all very important administrative things to make this a reality. And an effective reality for everybody, and making sure that everybody is actually on board with it. All Australian governments should fund systemic advocacy of LGBTIQA plus SB people with disability to strengthen representation at all levels. This one I find interesting because I wholeheartedly agree with that, right? I absolutely agree with that. I have a question, which is, if we were already supporting them, and we were already supporting them, would that actually cover most of that already? That is more of a philosophical question, but also the flip side of that is it doesn't matter. If we are actively supporting both of them at the same time, via things like the curb cut effect and the educational benefits of the curb cut effect and so on and so forth, by focusing on this group, which is a more focused group, we will fundamentally benefit these two distinct groups, at least tangentially, if not directly. Indirectly, if not directly. So I wholeheartedly support this. To me, it's more of a thing of, if we're doing this, is that actually showing how much we haven't done enough in the past? But that's a different conversation. Let's move forwards with, yes, this to me is very good. The Department of Social Services and the National Disability Insurance Agency should improve linkages between the NDIS disability, employment services, and related initiatives, targeting improved employment outcomes for all people with disability, including NDIS participants. Now, I like this. I know some people actually don't like when stuff about disabled people should be getting jobs is inbuilt, but I think that that's still an important part, because some of us disabled people, or people with disabilities if you want to use that term, but some of us want jobs. I actually like having a job of something to do. Personally, myself, being disabled stops me from having something to do from which I feel that I have earned to have a break from. Um, I don't mind, um, like, I want to work so that I feel like my relaxation time is earned. Um, and that's a thing of just how I am as a person. Other people respond differently to their wants to work versus their ability to work. Um, People have different values associated to employment and or relaxation and so on and so forth. But so I'm glad that this is in the documentation. The concern always arises when this sort of thing becomes the focus of the plan, and that may not be in the documentation. That may just be how people are running the NDIS or the DSP, or whatever. Like if like with the DSP, hey, you have to go to job seeker assessment, and your job seeker, which is a private company and is not actually part of Centrelink, they can turn around and tell Centrelink to cut you off. That is a problem. That is a fundamental problem that gives way too much power to not only these private independent agencies that have no concept of what your disability is, but it puts a lot of emphasis on you need to have a job or be trying to get a job, even if you are physically or mentally incapable of having one. Um, and it's absurd, and like the DSP has issues of its own, including the fact that you have to go through that process before you can get on the DSP. What was I think it was something like I can't remember exactly. I actually feel like this is what I'm about to say is wrong because I feel like it's much higher. But I think it's something like you have to spend um, at least 6 months. It's higher than that. I know it's high, but I'm just going to say this because it's the lower estimate in my brain, and I'm certain it's much higher. It's something like screw it. Why am I talking? Um, Program of support. Um, da 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 da. Who has to participate? Blah blah blah. How to show you participate. There we go. You must participate for at least 18 months and complete the program if it went for less than 18 months, but you have to participate for 18 months before you're allowed to receive the pension. Right? This isn't simply, oh, hey, you're on the DSP, now you get, you're on the DSP, you need to do this as well to keep it. No, you need to do this before you can receive the DSP. And so, like, problems with the DSP, including that it's, often has a 2-year threshold just to get onto the DSP. This is why. It's all about this sort of business. So, yeah, it's a problem, and it fundamentally transforms the disability support pension in Australia into a you must try and get employed, and if you fail at getting employed, you do not get the DSP, and if you succeed at getting employed, congratulations, you probably don't need the DSP according to our metric. It's horrible. It is absolutely horrible, but it's an example of how if you structure something wrong, or you overemphasize what should be a relatively an important, but you emphasize what should only be a part of the system, and you make it mandatory for everybody, and so on and so forth, like it can be a disaster. Um, Now, I am hoping once I just to cover the base, I dislike NDIS more than I dislike the DSP. I look at the DSP as this is better than the NDIS at so many levels. But I am very much hoping that reading through these changes, reading through these adjustments, reading through these proposals and everything about it, I am hoping that I will actually leave this thinking better of the NDIS than I do of the DSP. So that's kind of my hope going into this. We'll see if it pans out. Continuing on though. 1.8. National Cabinet should agree to jointly invest in a capacity building program for families and caregivers of children with developmental concerns and disability. This is great for a bunch of reasons, not least of which being, hey, if you've got a parent who doesn't know how to deal with their disabled child, they can get training. That's what this is. It's about building programs for families and caregivers to actually be able to do these things and provide their supports on their end as well. So it's not just, oh, it's a parent, the mother will totally take care of the child so we don't have to put any effort in. No, this is going, the mother's going to take care of the child, the mother needs support too, and the mother might need training on how to do this job, so let's figure out how to give them the training. So this is fantastic, and obviously it's not just the mother. I'm just using the mother here because that is very much the stereotype. But like in my case, it's half the time it's not my mother who's doing it, it's my sister or my father, but usually like between the three of them, it's my mother doing things, my sister doing things, and then my dad doing things, and usually it's in that order simply because my dad isn't physically home. He is physically at work, and so it often ends up being my mother and or my sister who are doing most of the support for me. And my sister is disabled. My mother has her issues. My dad has his issues. All of them medical issues. So them getting better training to support me, and me getting better training to support them, is a big deal. Because again, as I said, my sister has disability, so me being more equipped to assist is actually really good. So that's that. My one concern I'm going to raise here, and I'm just going to flag it right now because just reminded me of a thing in some of the application paperwork for NDIS that really pissed me off. I am thinking if, like, this shouldn't be a criteria. And what I mean by saying this shouldn't be a criteria, or it is a criteria, but it shouldn't be an overly emphasized one, is, let's say you do the program, or no, let's use me as an example. Let's say I engage in one of these programs, and I fail the program. I fail the program probably because of my own disability, but it's entirely possible, and in fact it's entirely probable, that my sister's needs, I am the wrong person to be for trying to fulfill those needs. Either because I am disabled and unable to do it, or because my issues and who I am as a person fundamentally clash with her wants and her needs from a caregiver. That sort of thing does exist and does happen. Again, not trying to go into any of the details, but that is a problem we do have, is our disabilities do actually clash with each other and result in us getting worse. So if I did one of these, say, courses to try and support her, and I failed that course, is that going to be a black mark that goes, well, we're not going to give you guys funding anymore because you failed to achieve the goal? And if you turn around and say, that's because the goal was unachievable, it was inappropriate. We didn't know it was inappropriate to start with, but we tried it, we did it, and we came out the other end going, no, this is not the solution. If you treat us as a tick box situation and you look at it and go, that box isn't ticked, so you're being denied or you're being blacklisted or something like that, that can be a huge problem. And the reason that reminded me of the application process is because one of the most infuriating parts of the application process for NDIS was list all the treatment that you've received for your condition. And then you had to rate it on a scale of, essentially, was it successful, was it not successful, or was it your fault that it wasn't successful? Or was it mixed results? There was no space for, not only did it not work, but it gave me negative side effects and made my disability worse. There was no category for that. And I've had a couple of treatments where we stopped the treatment when it was discovered that either we were not able to detect results, like we couldn't actually tell if it was helping or making things worse, And that decision was made in part by the medical practitioner, like they couldn't actually tell, or it was, this has made my condition worse, it has made my disability even more severe than it was before, yes, we are stopping this. I was told that the correct answer to that was basically to tick the box that said it was my fault. That is a problem. That is a fundamental problem with how that assessment was set up and organized and all that sort of thing. And if you do something like this as a criteria, as a fundamental criteria, and you approve or deny things based on a tick in a box, it can be problematic. I don't actually think that that's what they're going to do. But that could be what they do, especially if they try and streamline the process in some way, or if they try and tie it to other things. So I'm raising that simply as they're like, even as much as this could be a really good thing and this is sounding really good, if you structure it badly, it creates way more negative results than positive results. So, yeah, moving forwards. Action 1.9. Oh, also, hi, I can see a few people more people have joined me. Hello. Anyway, back to 1.9. National Cabinet should agree to jointly invest in state and territory home and community care support programs to provide additional support to people with disability outside the NDIS. Again, sounds great. See my points, of implementation could be an issue earlier, but otherwise that sounds really great. 1.10. The Department of Social Services with states and territories should develop a nationally consistent approach for the delivery of aids and equipment outside the NDIS. Yep. 1.11. National Cabinet should agree to jointly invest in psychosocial supports outside the NDIS to assist people with severe and persistent mental ill health currently unable to access supports. Great. 1.12. National Cabinet should agree to jointly invest in early supports for children and emerging development concerns and disability. 1.13. National Cabinet should agree to jointly invest in programs and initiatives to support adolescents and young adults with disability aged 9 to 21 to prepare for and manage key life transition points such as secondary school employment and living independently. I have a lot to say about this. I know I've said stuff about this in the past, but that is a huge deal right there. But before I say it, I just want to raise that all of this is a package. One problem that this is going to face is that all of these individual points are going to be up for compromise. To the point where, imagine, and this is entirely possible, but imagine if they presented this to National Cabinet, the states, everything, like all of these different, all the Australian governments, and in order to get any of this off, they have to compromise down, which is almost certainly going to happen to some extent. The question is to what extent. But they were, to remove a whole bunch of them, and we would end up with, the employment services being a big focus, and the, investing in capacity building programs for families and caregivers. And let's say that those were the only two that went through intact. But then they altered this so that it was a bit more of a checkboxy approach, and all of the programs, all the capacity building programs, were all directly associated with this. Which would just create that problem that I said earlier about how it's just trying to funnel into this employment factor, and all of these other really good things would be sacrificed along the way. And even if you pull those things off, if you do not support the funding in appropriate areas, I'm wondering why Indigenous people don't actually get a mention in this section, by the way. Maybe that's a separate section somewhere. But, if you don't take the whole package, or if you cripple certain parts of the package, this could end up being a disaster. As good as it looks right now, what comes out the other end may not look like this. But I'm hopeful that this goes forwards as it looks, because that looks really good on the whole. Anyway, so that was recommendation 1. Let's move on to recommendation 2. increase the scale and pace of change in mainstream and community inclusion and accessibility, and improve the connection between mainstream services and the NDIS. Um, oh, I just spotted a message on Twitch, but it is a spam message on Twitch. I think that's my first ever. No, it's not my first ever, but it's definitely my first spam message in a very long time. So let's just ignore the Twitch for now and get back to this. All right, cool. So, increasing the scale and pace of NDIS to improve it. Yep, cool. 2.1. The Attorney General's Department. With the Department of Social Services and the states and territories should develop a unified and contemporary approach to disability rights, discrimination, and inclusion legislation. Yeah, that actually sounds really nice, especially if you're talking about, things at the legislative level. It hopefully would improve consistency across legislation. Action 2.2. All Australian governments should improve the recognition and responsiveness of government services to culturally and linguistically diverse concepts of disability and care by investing in targeted research, education, material, and capability building for government organisations and staff, professionals and providers who deliver government services. That sounds great, but is this proposing, and this is the question here, where is the money for that coming from? Is that coming out of the NDIS budget? Which means that more money that would have previously been going to disabled people is now going to research on disabled people? Or is this proposing that Australian government grants and so on and so forth, separate to the NDIS, that there should be more of that money directed towards these outcomes? The outcome is great. I want to see this happen. My question is, where is that money coming from? And if that is an overall increase in cost, who is losing out in order to get this? Now, who is losing out is a big question, because obviously, as I said earlier about the curb cut effect, spending money in these areas benefits most people. In fact, it's going to benefit all people to a greater or lesser extent, because don't forget, if you survive long enough to become an elderly person, chances are you are going to reap the benefits of programs like this in your lifetime. Like 100% of people either die or grow old. Either. Anyway, the point is, there is a high chance that you will, as an individual, be impacted by this. The difference is it for most of your lifetime or only for a small part of your lifetime? So research into these things is a big deal. But it's the thing of saying, hey, should we cut money from the military budget, or should we cut money from some other budget, or should we just direct, hey, look, we have a cultural or research grant budget. We're just going to leave that to be the same amount, and things that we previously would have spent money on that is massively beneficial to society, now we're going to force it over to this area, which may have more or may have less benefit depending on what the money is being taken away from. Those sorts of questions are big budgetary questions, so while I approve very strongly of this action, I do question where is that money going to come from. And this comes back to, and this is why I make a big thing about the economic side of things about this debate, is simply, if the NDIS is spending the money well, and if the mechanisms of how money is spent is not ripe for abuse, whether accidentally or deliberately, or as a functional way of the only way to get results, which is what I've talked about previously, it's not so much about getting the money under control. That is not what we're trying to do here. It is one way to look at it, but what we're trying to do with the money is making sure that the money that is spent actually has results in relating to positive results in relation to the disabled person, quality of life, so on and so forth, which a lot of that money is not having those results. And some of that is fundamentally in the mechanisms of the economic setup. That was a lot of words that may not have been completely understood, but the point is Where is this money coming from is very important, or what is being lost to put this money in, and making sure that the groups that are getting lost is not the groups that this is supposed to be benefiting. That is important. If I had to choose between research and money going to the disabled person, I'd probably pick money going to the disabled person over the research. Both is what we want. But if I had to choose, I'd probably put the money to the disabled person and go from there. Anyway, probably so many points. Like, I don't want to be locked into saying that is the optimal way to go, because I don't even believe that that's the optimal way to go. It's not a binary. There are so many options. There are so many angles that this could be. People look at it often like it's a binary when it shouldn't be. So I apologize if what I just said may have given you an incorrect image, or may have sounded like a problematic image. My point is just raising, hey, this is great, but. And the but does not override the importance of this. The but is more about how are you going to implement it, because we should have this result. But if you implement it poorly, we won't even have that result, and that result could, the process could make things worse. So that is what I was trying to say there. And that is often more or less what I'm trying to say with a lot of this commentary. A lot of it is simply about the implementation. Anyway, continuing. Action 2.3, the Department of Social Services with relevant agencies should develop and trial a mechanism to publicly communicate the performance of current disability standards under the Disability Discrimination Act 1992. Look, yes, but are you proposing that to be a one-off or on a regular basis? And what are you doing to make sure it's going to be on a regular basis? I'm reminded again of the DSP had a bit of an overhaul back in 2011, and there was a promise that they would regularly update and regularly address this and regularly, they just never did. It hasn't really been touched since 2011. So yeah, this is great. I wholeheartedly approve of that. Is this a one-off, or is it going to happen more than once going forwards? Action 2.4. All Australian governments should incorporate disability impact assessments into new policy proposals assessment processes. Yes. Look, I think that this... I want to say this is great, but coming from experience, as much as this is important and valuable, if you have to do it for every single new policy proposal, it will make those policy proposals take longer. Now, that isn't a bad thing unto itself. It's a bad thing when everything else is inefficient. If a policy proposal is like, just getting this going properly is an 18 to 24 month process, that is a problem for the people who needed that outcome in less than 18 to 24 months. It tends to be something like this is not a problem unto itself. It only becomes a problem if you have fundamental issues within the system. The best example of this, and I'm going to use the American version, but filibustering. It is a fundamental problem in the American political system, and it causes a huge number of issues within politics, getting bills passed, getting anything, getting any action to happen. Filibustering is a major problem. And anything that gives filibustering more power, even if only accidentally, is a fundamental problem. This is not the problem. The potential problem is how that interacts with other steps and other issues within pre-existing issues within policy proposals. And so yeah, I like this. I want this to be a thing. I think that it could emphasize already pre-existing issues. And that is not itself inherently a bad thing. If you've emphasized the issue, like if you expose that issue through its emphasis, it encourages action to be taken on fixing that problem. So even though I'm raising, hey, there might be a thing here, that could ultimately be a really, really good thing because it could be the thing that pushes it to fix other parts of our system. Um, so yeah, this itself sounds good to me. I just have concerns about how it would interact with what we have already, and those concerns aren't on the side of this side, it's on the side of the thing it's interacting with. So, moving forwards. Um, all Australian governments should take steps to protect the rights to inclusive education for children with disability and developmental concerns in early childhood education and care and school. Oh, I forgot to talk about that back here as well, didn't I? I have spoken about this in other videos, but there have been a lot of studies that say that the more emphasis you put in a child's formative years, the statistically more likely the rest of their life is going to be much better. You put more emphasis into early childhood education, it has bigger outcomes for the rest of their life. Even if they have a terrible high school, like a terrible secondary school, if their primary school was fantastic, they are statistically far more likely to succeed than if they had a great high school but a poor primary school. So those early years are the single, arguably the most important part of any person's life for determining or improving or decreasing their future. So emphasis on the early childhood stuff is super important. And speaking for myself here, if I got sacrificed in order for more of these things to be achieved, I wouldn't see that as an inherently bad thing. It would suck that I was getting sacrificed, but I know that the much more widespread impact by focusing on childhood is much bigger than focusing on the adults. Having said that, we shouldn't have to make that choice. That should not be a choice we are making. We should not be making this comparison. That what system that exists would want us to make that the comparison point. So, we should be able to achieve both. And a system that does not allow us to achieve both is a problem at a fundamental level. But I am glad that they are bringing that focus into childhood into this review, especially given I think Shorten said that almost 50% of NDIS is spent on children. Like that, I'm pretty sure that's what he said in the recent speech. I'd actually have to double check those statistics based on the most recent NDIS budget reports and stuff. But yeah, that is a lot. So actually taking steps to, because that wasn't planned. It was not like the NDIS wasn't intentionally designed to accommodate for children. That was kind of just an add-on. And now they're going, hey, maybe we should actually intentionally make that part of the system and deal with it properly, which is fantastic. If the only thing that comes out of the NDIS review is that childhood is dealt with better, that would be pretty good. There's a lot of other things that I really want them to do and deal with, but that would still be pretty good. Anyway, moving forward. 2.6, National Cabinet should agree to a multilateral schedule to a new disability intergovernmental agreement that replaces the principles for determining the responsibilities of the NDIS and other services, including the applied principles and table support, to better clarify respective responsibilities. Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me as well. Yeah, like, a lot of this is just administrative stuff, and as I've said time and time again, it's all about the implementation, but it's also about how it impacts other things, or how it interacts with other parts of legislation, other parts of the system. What is that relationship? Because this side of it may be completely positive, but the thing it needs to interact with may not be, or the thing it needs to interact with may not be designed to deal with NDIS, and that causes a slew of major problems along the way. So I think most of my quote unquote criticism so far is going to revolve around that as a point, which hopefully as we continue will become less of a thing, but probably will keep going. Anyway, that was 2.6. 2.7, the Department of Social Services, working with other Commonwealth agencies, state and territory disability agencies, and the National Disability Insurance Agency, should implement a priority work program to improve coordination between complex mainstream settings and the NDIS. Again, yeah, it's all about the implementation. That sounds good. How is it going to be implemented? 2.8, the National Disability Insurance Agency and the Department of Education, with state and territory education and disability agencies, should develop a plan to better connect the NDIS and school education systems and improve educational outcomes for children with disability. What are they defining as children here? And the reason I'm asking is that including high schoolers? Is that including secondary? Is that including university? Or is it just early childhood? I know I said just before that, like, if you have to pick primary school. If you have to pick kindergarten. Pick the earliest intervention to make the earliest parts as affordable and achievable as possible. Which, of course, benefits families in general, because, hey, if you could do something like go, from now on, all kindergarten is free and primary school has massive rebates. That massively benefits the families of these children. Now, it may be their life may become a big problem when it comes to high school, but as like all the statistics that we've got say that primary school has the bigger influence. Not least of which because if you've learned a lot of the core things really well in primary school, you're more equipped to deal with high school. So, yeah, that sort of buffering effect that, work on the foundations and build up is really important. But I'm curious as to if they're focusing so much on children, does that mean because they tended, like in previous documents when we were going through the glossary, I pointed out how it really bounces between age 6, age 7, age 9 for a bunch of these things. If they turn around and say children stops at age 6, that is going to have very different impact than children stops at age 9. And a very different impact of children stops once they are actually legal adults. That those are very, very different boundaries. And I'm not so much pointing out a problem, it's more I'm curious where that line is. But this is still a very good thing, even if they went with the lower number of, oh yes, it's only supporting children up to the age of 6. That's still better than them not supporting any of it at all. So that is overall relatively good. Wow, I have quite a few Maltese people joining in on the stream. Hi. We are just talking about the National Disability Insurance Scheme in Australia. So I love that you're here. Maybe you'll learn something. But I could have a different conversation. Like, I actually really like Malta. The Maltese system, I actually think is better than the Australian system in a lot of areas. The Maltese system also has issues that need to be sorted out, and it has some strengths, not least of which being it's a much smaller geographic area, it's a much smaller population, and it's a much more concentrated population. So achieving good outcomes with the Maltese system is easier than achieving good outcomes with the Australian system. But like when I talk about like the economics and when I make comparisons, I'm often trying to make comparisons to either the US models, which I have studied to a certain extent, and the Maltese model, which I have directly experienced and studied to a certain extent. I would love to actually compare it to the UK model. I wish I knew a lot more about the NHS, the UK model, because I think that's actually a better comparison point for the Australian model. But yeah. Hi Maltese people. Um, welcome to the stream. I guess was what that was. Ah, yep, yep. Anyway, um, 2.8. Hang on, had I done 2. I don't think I did 2.7. I feel like I skipped that. So let's go back to 2.7. Sorry. The Department of Social Services, working with Commonwealth agencies, state and territory, should implement, with the NDIA also, should implement a priority work program to improve coordination. Okay, I had read that. 2.8, the National Disability Insurance Agency and Department of Education with state and territory educations should develop a plan to better connect the NDIS and school for children with disability. Okay, I did read that as well. That's what I just read. My bad. I lost track. 2.9, the Productivity Commission should develop an NDIS transport policy that better meets the mobility needs of participants. Okay. The short answer is yes. The long answer is Uber exists and that's a problem. I have spoken about this before, but the impact that Uber had on taxis had a run-on effect on disabled populations. So either this is basically going to mean Uber needs to come under regulation, or it's going to mean the government now needs to support a taxi system, a more effective taxi system, or subsidized taxis, or things like that, in order for that to be viable. But if not, like, especially with the taxi system, if taxis still have to compete with Uber, it almost, like, doesn't matter how much of an emphasis you put on, say, disability. So, like, disabled people, you could turn to them and say, we will pay for 100% of your taxi usage. Just, you use a taxi, the government pays for it. You could do that, and taxi companies will still not earn enough revenue to keep themselves afloat or to be able to provide sufficient services. And Uber will get a lot of people anyway, because a lot of disabled people use Uber. Because at the end of the day, one reason people use Uber is not because of anything to do with safety or access, it's because it's financially affordable. And when you have disabled people in poverty, it doesn't matter what supports you set up. If they need to pick the thing that will not destroy their budget, they'll pick the thing that won't destroy their budget, and that is often Uber. Even though Uber does not have a great track record for disabled people. So, yeah, this really is that thing of, hey, if you want to do that, it means reform in other sectors of the Australian economy, of the Australian government, of policy and that sort of thing. And it would require regulation on things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Uber is the obvious example, but there are less obvious examples as well. Heck, just the cost of fuel could be impacted by this. So anyway, moving forwards, 2.10. The Australian government should develop a national strategy to improve the quality of the disability ecosystem for First Nations people with disability. I really want to know why First Nations people were not included in recommendation 1. I was really surprised that it wasn't included. But it's good that it is getting included over here. So I feel like it really surprised me that LGBTQ plus was included, but First Nations weren't previously. And LGBTQ I don't think mentioned here, so I'm wondering, like, what is the reason behind it being mentioned in one place but not somewhere else? Is that the suggestion that compromise is already being taken in this review? Yeah. It's not so much that that's not for me to say. It's there are people with more expertise who I think would be like, I'm raising this as a flag, but it's a flag I know I don't understand to the full extent. I expect other people they would be able to explain the impact of this flag, or even say, explain why it isn't really a flag. This is a yellow flag, not a red flag, I guess. to me at present. Anyway, but yeah, that this proposal on itself is a good thing still. 2.11. The Australian government should implement legislative change to allow participants, once they turn 65, to receive supports in both the NDIS and the aged care system concurrently, and clarify when aged care supports are reasonable and necessary. This is a big deal. This is like, at the moment, you turn 65, you're off the NDIS, you're in the aged care system. And the aged care system is often not equipped to deal with disabled people. It's able to deal with the elderly, but if you're both elderly and disabled, it may have difficulties dealing with you. And the aged care system has had its own need for reforms at various points in its own history. And I'm not 100% certain what the current state of it is, but we all know it's going to get worse. Like, we have an aging population. The impact is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So, once again, I love this. It's going to make the budget even bigger. It is going to make NDIS cost taxpayers a lot more. And while it may be for some of the best outcomes possible for our society, so it's money that is worth spending, if we are not allocating those funds to begin with, it's going to be a problem. And this, I did comment, and I directed this question directly at the Liberal representative at the time. I can't remember what her name was, but I've mentioned this before. I was involved in a meeting that was set up by Senator Jordan Steelejohn to kind of take a look at, hey, this is the budget when the budget was released and what it was doing, and they were very, very big on trying to say, oh no, us putting a cap on isn't a budget cut, which I was like, yes it is, and it's like, I completely agree, it's technically a cap and not a cut in wordage, but in effect, when the prediction is NDIS is going to increase, the cost will increase by roughly 14% every year, and you turn around and say, we are officially saying that over the next 3 years, I think it may have actually been 5 years, but I think, like, I'm just going to say 3 years, we're only going to do 8%. No, it was 3 years, yeah. We're only going to do an 8% increase. That means that all of our numbers say that it's going to be a 14% increase year on year, and we're actually only going to increase it by 3% each year. That is not good. That is not good. That is fundamentally a cut, or it will lead to cuts, or it will lead to people and or the NDIS panicking, because everybody in the NDIS, every single person will immediately know, and did immediately know, that because now the costs, the budget is not going to increase sufficiently, they need to make cuts in order to actually use the new budget. So even if you turn around and say it's a cap, not a cut, that cap guarantees cuts will occur. So, and I would argue it is a cut. By definition, it's a cut. You're cutting it from a promise of 14% increase each year to 3% each year. That's a cut. That is a cut. So, yeah. Bringing it back to this, adding aged care, like, over 65, I think this is great, but that is absolutely going to massively increase the budget, and that is going to massively increase the budget by a huge amount, because we have an aging population. So every year it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, which could mean more and more and more people lose out, which makes me think, like, this is where, like, I keep raising the implementation. How's it going to be implemented? So on and so forth. If you have such a huge emphasis on childhood and over 65, everyone in between suffers. Everyone else in between, just, it's a smaller pie to go around. And a lot of us aren't even getting access to the pie to begin with, even though we're entitled to it. Like, it's, oh yeah, we ticked the boxes, you are allowed to have a piece of the pie. Oh, you can't make your way over to where the pie is? Oh well, guess you'll just have to hold on, we'll keep this slice of pie quote unquote reserved for you, so nobody else can have it. Um, these are problems just within any budget to begin with, not simply NDIS. That's a huge problem in general. My concern is if you're suddenly giving a bigger portion of that already overstretched pie to both childhood and age 65 and over, you need to make the pie bigger. You need to make the pie bigger, and you need to actually get it to these people efficiently and in a cost-effective way, not on the side of the disabled person, on the side of the NDIS. You need to put that effort in. Otherwise, people are going to lose more than they already have. So yeah, that is what that flag is. Again, I love this. I want this to be a thing. The implementation does not look comforting. Does not sound comforting, just based on this is where we're at now. If they address all of this in some way when we get to them talking about the economics and the market of NDIS, if they actually address these things, I will be so happy. I will be ecstatic. But I am still not confident they will, because this will be the first time, hopefully, that there is even a real emphasis on this angle in a way that I think is appropriate. And I'm not convinced it will be, because I haven't read it yet. We will see. Eventually, that is a long way away. Yeah. So, 2.12, the Australian government should implement legislative or process change to allow access to NDIS disability support for older Australian program participants. This is kind of like a repeat of the earlier stuff we've read, but now for this section. 2.13, Australian government should agree as a matter of priority to expand universally available child development checks to ensure the early identification of children with developmental concerns and disability and enable early intervention. That's interesting. That is a very specific thing. Child development checks for that. That is interesting. I like and dislike this. I like this because it seems to solve a lot of problems. I dislike this because usually, not always, and I think that this comes under the bracket of not always for me as well, but usually I'm a bigger advocate of give the person your money. Don't buy a person food when you don't even know what that person can or can't eat. Do you know their dietary requirements? No, so don't buy them food. Just give them money and let them spend it on food. And if they choose not to spend it on food, that's fine, because they're going to spend it on what they think is more important. If they already have enough food, giving them more money for food isn't helpful. So, I like this. I like that there is money specifically being put for this purpose. But usually, I feel that it's, so long as your economic system is designed for it, which arguably ours isn't. It used to be, but arguably it isn't anymore. I would rather do things like go, hey, we're just going to add to Medicare, the Medicare rebate, the healthcare system, that if you go to a medical specialist, we will pay, it can all be bulk billed. If you just do something like that, you'll have the exact same effect, but it'll be the choice of the person, of the parents, of the family, to actually engage with that or not. But you can make it attractive. So even though it's a choice to engage, it's an attractive choice because it opens up more possibilities. But it also means that parents aren't locked in to, we have this money, but we don't have the petrol to get us there. So we've got this check, we can't spend it. It's useless to us. Or we have this check, we're going to spend it, but it's spent poorly. Like, oh, hey, we got our kid tested for some of these things. Like, we got them tested for autism and ADHD. This is great. There's something with our child, but it wasn't either of those things. The check has run out. We can't take this any further. All we've got is knowledge of what it isn't, not what it is. if you've been able to make across the board a sort of Medicare rebate sort of program for all of this, that goes a lot further than a check. So I like this. I think that taking the Medicare approach would actually be a much better way to do things, economically speaking. But that is based on certain assumptions about our economy. That is not always the case. For example, if there are various reasons why a lot of doctors do not bulk bill anymore. And so if you just turn around and say, hey, if you bulk bill this thing, we'll pay for more of it. That doesn't mean the doctors are going to bulk bill, which means that access may still be restricted. Or it could result in double charging could happen with these checks. In fact, double charging is more a bigger danger with these checks. Because one doctor could essentially absorb the entire check. Whereas if you're doing it as Medicare rebates, not quite as big of a risk there. But the point is that depending on what your economic structure is, dictates which of these is actually going to have the greatest outcome. I still believe, based on my understanding, I still believe that going the Medicare approach would be fundamentally better. But I could be wrong about that. And as the years have gone by, especially as Medicare has gotten weaker and weaker and has become a smaller and smaller part of our healthcare system and has become less and less accessible, a program like this would actually weaken Medicare by having a program like this. Fundamentally, it would weaken Medicare. But if Medicare has already been weakened by all of these other things, yes, this might be the nail in the coffin, but it was a nail that was going to come from somewhere else anyway. I would rather see Medicare strengthened. I really want to see Medicare strengthened, just across the board. Let's help everybody in our society. And early intervention, which Medicare provides early intervention from a medical perspective, is much better than an insurance scheme. You want the money to go further? Put the money into Medicare. That was that statement. But that is a huge economics debate, which will almost certainly come up again as I have my rants and express my opinions on these things. Anyway, Action 2.14, state and territory governments should commit to and implement the general accident stream of the National Injury Insurance Scheme. Yes, absolutely. Again, I still would prefer Medicare over injury insurance. Insurance, here's the problem, and this applies to so many things. If you are only dealing with the problem after the damage has occurred, and the damage costs money to fix. If you spend money to mean that the damage never occurs in the first place, or at least you minimize the amount of injuries that occur in the first place, everything becomes cheaper. So it's a bit more of an upfront cost, but that upfront cost is lower than the cost of dealing with the damage. So, preventative measures are, in almost every scenario, the best option. So I would rather, again, I'm not noticing, there's no mention about Medicare. And remember that the NDIS budget comes out of the Medicare levy. I want to see Medicare strengthened. I'd love to see Medicare strengthened in addition to NDIS being strengthened. But if I had to make a choice, and this choice should not exist in the first place for a long list of reasons, but if I had to make the choice, I would pick Medicare over NDIS and make Medicare take on a lot of these roles, a lot of these responsibilities, because some of this stuff is already supposed to be covered by Medicare. So strengthen Medicare, and the NDIS covers when Medicare fails, or when Medicare isn't applicable. But focus on preventative first, economically speaking. It's the best choice. Now, again, that doesn't... I do think that we should have both, but yeah. Moving onwards... 2.15, the National Disability Insurance Agency and the Department of Social Services, working with state and territory governments and other relevant Commonwealth agencies, should update current arrangements governing the interaction between the NDIS and compensation schemes to reduce overlap and improve participant experiences. Yes. Yes, this. This is an administrative thing, but it is also a major economic thing. Shorten made a mention in his speech. I'm going to paraphrase it very, very badly here, but it was essentially, it's ridiculous and/or we need to eliminate the fact that you need to send an invoice to somebody and pay them to look at your invoice and then send that invoice to the NDIA. Like, we're paying for middlemen. That shouldn't be necessary. Now, as I've said before, and I mentioned this when I was talking about intermediaries, because this is another form of intermediary, I absolutely think that there is a place for intermediaries, but it should be optional, not mandatory. And it may be an option that the vast majority of disabled people make use of, for various reasons. But it should be an optional thing, not a mandatory thing, but it also should be a supported optional thing, not a mandatory thing. So, but if you can improve the administration so that it's not simply an optional thing. At the moment, it's necessary, and part of the reason it's necessary is because it's the only way to effectively achieve results. If you can design the NDIS so that it's not the only way to achieve results, then that is a great thing, and it means that money that is spent on intermediaries is being spent on effective intermediaries rather than just everyone, because everyone has to have one, even if it's not relevant. So, yeah, that is overall a very good thing, which would have some economic impact as well. But this, as far as I can tell, most of this review is about the administrative side of things, which is important, and that seems to be a really strong and important part of it. And it's definitely a part of it that has gotten a decent amount of mention in shortened speeches, in the ABC reporting, in NDIS review statements that, like the little bits that have come out over the last however months. This has been a focal point of conversation. 2.16. The Disability Reform Ministerial Council should agree to cease the use of in-kind arrangement in the NDIS. I want to say... So this is one of those things which is abuse is very possible here. It's not just possible, it's almost guaranteed with in-kind arrangements. But in-kind arrangements can, and I'm saying can, offer solutions that monetary arrangements can't achieve, or can't necessarily achieve as well. So I'm not 100% certain that an absolute statement of cease the use of in-kind arrangements, I'm not 100% certain that ceasing altogether is the best plan. I think that there could, and I'm saying could, not should here, very important, I think that there could be a place for in-kind arrangements in the NDIS, and I think that that can actually be beneficial for all parties, including the NDIS. But it's also an area of exploitation. It's also a potential area for abuse and predatory practice. So I can definitely agree with regulation existing, or at the very least, it being de-emphasized as a part of the system. So that whole bracket is... I could go either way on that one. I don't have enough information personally to know, is this a big enough problem that ceasing it altogether is the best plan? And that's the thing, is that if it is filled with predation, if it is filled with abuse, if there is far more negative than positive coming out of this, then ceasing it altogether and going, we might introduce it later once we're able to deal with it appropriately. Like once we've gotten all these other things sorted, then we can come over there and deal with it. Ceasing it altogether, cutting it off so that it's one less thing to deal with and we can focus on things that will have much better impact. If that's the argument behind it, then yeah, sure, I can agree with that, assuming it's as bad as that. Which I think it is, but I don't want to fall too hard either way on this. This could be a good thing by having it. It also could be a good thing by ceasing it altogether. Yellow flag. Yellow flag. Alright. How long has it been? I've been doing this stream for about an hour, so I'm going to stop this recording. I'm going to start recording again a few seconds later, but it'll give me a chance to actually sip some of my coffee that I had made about an hour ago. Yeah, I will, so yeah, I'll pause the recording, and that'll allow me to split it more easily when it goes on to YouTube. But the stream will keep going, so you don't have to go anywhere. Alright, back in a minute.